Right now, Trump is flying to Istanbul. The negotiations are under threat. 3 issues that could ruin everything. Europe is putting pressure on the US. The stakes have skyrocketed. Stay tuned. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed Russia's elite. Invulnerable and unique equipment reduced to rubble. Ukraine has deployed a killer drone to the front lines that has surprised everyone. Dramatic footage from the front lines. The Kremlin is attacking Poland. It has already begun. All this and more coming up in our program Hotspot. Breaking news. Trump shocks everyone. He is currently flying to Istanbul. Media leaks. There are 3 issues on the table that could blow up the negotiations. Meanwhile, before the parties even sit down at the table, a diplomatic battle is raging behind the scenes, with the stakes rising by the minute. Europe makes an unexpected move. In the next segment, everything that happened in the past 24 hours. New insider information, plans, and threats. Stay tuned.
This is a week that could very well become a crucial turning point in Russia's ongoing war against Ukraine.
I will be in Turkey this Thursday, May 15th. And I am expecting Putin in Turkey, in person. And I hope that this time Putin won't look for excuses as to why he can't do something.
Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed his readiness for a face-to-face meeting with Putin in Istanbul. This is how the president of Ukraine responded to the Kremlin leader's proposal for direct talks. He called it a good sign that Russia is finally considering ending the war. But as Zelensky insists, the first step in this is a ceasefire. This position has also been supported by members of the coalition of willing countries.
We are expecting a ceasefire. All proposals are on the table. This proposal on the table, a complete and unconditional ceasefire, lasting long enough to provide the necessary foundation for diplomacy, could significantly bring peace closer. Ukraine has been proposing this for a long time, and so have its partners. The whole world is talking about it. We are waiting for a clear response from Russia. Russia will have to end the war sooner or later. The killings must stop.
However, the Kremlin ignored this idea.
We propose that the authorities in Kiev resume the negotiations that they broke off at the end of 2022. To resume direct negotiations. And I want to emphasize, without any preconditions. We propose to start without delay already next Thursday, May 15th, in Istanbul, where they were previously held and where they were interrupted. We are committed to serious negotiations with Ukraine. The purpose of these negotiations is to eliminate the root causes of the conflict and to achieve the establishment of a long-term, lasting peace for the historical future. We do not rule out that in the course of these negotiations, it may be possible to agree on some new ceasefires, on a new cessation of hostilities.
Putin is playing the same old tune. He claims that it was the Ukrainian authorities who broke off negotiations at the end of 2022. But that's not true. The negotiations in Turkey fell apart in the spring of 2022, when, after the liberation of the cities of Bucha and Irpin near Kyiv, all the atrocities committed by the Russian army against civilians came to light, which are murders, violence, abductions, torture, and looting.
In this case, it is quite obvious that the issue is about who, in the end, will actually take the initiative and adopt a proactive stance, and who will directly demonstrate that all the peaceful rhetoric is merely a cover for continuing the war. And in this case, despite Putin's attempt to actually seize this initiative during his late-night address, which he delayed by more than an hour and a half, Ukraine nevertheless raised the stakes very sharply, specifically in terms of the level of representation. That is, when President Zelensky directly stated that he would personally be in Istanbul on Thursday and called on Putin to come in person as well, since it is Putin who decides whether to continue the war or finally stop the so-called special military operation.
So far, there has been no clear response from the Kremlin, only vague phrases and new excuses.
Kyiv has clearly demonstrated its commitment to achieving de-escalation directly. Meanwhile, Moscow has simply chosen yet another way to stall for time. But it isn't working because, in fact, they've cornered themselves. It's even a kind of zugzwang. If we draw an analogy with chess, where every move is the worst possible one, the worst specifically for the Russian aggressor.
And while the whole world is waiting for a decision from Putin, Donald Trump, as always, remains optimistic and has spoken about a potentially big day for Russia and Ukraine, and about ending the war.
Trump liked the fact that Putin agreed to negotiations. Unfortunately, there isn't a single word there about the need to establish a ceasefire before starting negotiations. Unfortunately, Trump doesn't have this. However, and this is very important, it is mentioned in the statement by the spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, who said that the U.S. will judge Russia not by its words, but by its actions. In other words, they will assess the willingness to negotiate. Based on whether, as I understand from the State Department's statement, a ceasefire is being observed, even if only partially, even if only in the air, like during those so-called truces that Putin announced for Easter and May 9th. Trump's special representative for relations with Kyiv also stated that, to begin with, a ceasefire must absolutely be observed. And during this time, negotiations can begin.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin and Zelensky have not communicated personally even once. There have been no publicly known direct talks between Moscow and Kyiv since March 2022. But everything could change as early as this week. Turkey is ready. The West is ready. America is ready. But is the Kremlin dictator ready to choose the path of peace? We will find out the answer to this question in just a few days.
Ukrainian armed forces struck at the heart of the occupiers. Near Toretsk, there was a powerful breakthrough, and in the Kursk region, a targeted strike hit Russian elite. The Marines are destroyed. Panic in Russian social media channels. Everything is burning, and the losses are horrific. The Ukrainian armed forces have destroyed Russia's invulnerable equipment. The footage is shocking. And while the Ukrainian armed forces are advancing, the Russians are destroying their own cities. Bombs are falling right on residential neighborhoods in Russia. Urgent updates from the front are coming up next.
Another enemy deployment point has been eliminated, and the Russians have complained about a missile strike in Rilsk, Kursk region. Preliminary reports indicate that the base of the 40th Marine Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces was hit.
A strike was carried out on the permanent deployment point, specifically the command and control post of the Russian army using American weaponry, namely HIMARS. According to all objective monitoring data, the command and control post was completely destroyed. Moreover, there is information from the Russian side itself that allows this target to be identified as an exclusively military facility. In other words, the evacuation of the wounded and accordingly the bodies of Russian Federation servicemen has been recorded.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to destroy Russian army personnel and military equipment. At the front, National Guard troops burned a Russian Tor M2 air defense system worth about $25 million. Drones dropped explosives on enemy equipment several times. After that, the missile system caught fire and the Russian occupiers began to flee. What happened to the crew of the system is unknown. But one thing is known: the Russian occupation forces operate by the principle, beat your own so that others are afraid. The Russian army once again dropped a half-ton Powers bomb on the Belgorod-Sara region. The shell had less than 60 kilometers left to reach Ukraine.
Yes, this is not the first case. According to reports from Russian media themselves, at least 70 accidental bomb drops have been recorded, 62 FABs, and 7 aerial bombs with a guided planning and correction module. It should be noted that this number of munitions was dropped by Russian aircraft specifically on the territory of the Russian Federation.
And while the aggressor's army is striking its own, the Russian dictator himself is trying to undermine the cooperation and unity between the Ukrainian side and Europe and the United States, and continues to insist on achieving his goals, among which is the complete capitulation of Ukraine. This is evidenced by calls to start negotiations based on the interrupted discussions and proposals in Istanbul at the end of March 2022, according to analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War.
As of May 2025, not even the intermediate stage of the so-called special military operation has been completed, namely the capture of the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, not to mention the strategic objectives such as denazification, demilitarization, and other Russian nonsense. That is why Putin is trying to use so-called peace-loving rhetoric to promote exclusively the Russian vision of ending the war in Ukraine at the expense of territorial concessions from our country and the effective disarmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Let us recall that Putin refused to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. It is likely that he is betting on a summer offensive, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation.
It should be noted that the Russian army's offensive has not stopped. Ukraine's territorial losses for the month of April amount to about 175 square kilometers. Yes, this is 6 times less than in November of last year. Nevertheless, the Russian army has intensified the nature of combat operations along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front.
Russia has also created a secret unit that specializes in sabotage, cyber attacks, and assassinations across Europe. According to Western intelligence agencies, this is a shadow organization called the Department of Special Tasks.
A hellish raid by the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine has tested a new, unique drone in combat, and it's simply explosive. The footage is stunning. The enemy is in a panic. The Ukrainian armed forces have a new deadly weapon of the future. While Ukraine storms ahead with modern technology, Putin's army is in chaos. Deserters are being tortured and humiliated to keep them at the front lines. The front is on fire. New assaults, new Russian failures, and a new escalation. Details of the offensive, new maps, and footage from the front lines. The whole truth about the front is coming up next.
Queen Hornet goes on the hunt. The first combat use of a drone with a grenade launcher in the armed forces of Ukraine. A new formidable weapon has appeared at the front. A drone with an attached grenade launcher, successfully tested in combat conditions for the first time. This unique footage is a real breakthrough for the tactical drones of the Ukrainian armed forces. The creators of this innovation are the pilots of the Bulava unit from the separate presidential brigade named after Bogdan Khmelnytsky. It was they who upgraded the drone by mounting a grenade launcher on it, creating what the unit has already dubbed the Queen Hornet. The name is well deserved, as this metallic predator is capable of delivering a painful and highly accurate sting. This is not just another drone carrying munitions, it is a smart platform that allows the pilot to keep a safe distance and adjust fire, and most importantly to operate with sniper-like precision. The idea of combining the drone's mobility with the firepower of a grenade launcher is a real upgrade in tactics for small groups. War is changing, and with it, so is the arsenal. The armed forces are increasingly adopting not just ordinary weapons, but high-tech solutions that make it possible to seize the initiative even in the most challenging areas of the front. One thing is clear, the Queen Hornet is just the beginning. And if this predator is already on the hunt, the sky will soon become even more dangerous for the occupiers. 21st century technologies, drones, satellites, precision artillery. But somewhere deep within the Russian world, true medievalism still persists. In Russian army units, methods of punishing deserters are used that resemble the Inquisition more than discipline. In the 15th, separate motorized rifle brigade, those who refuse to go into battle or try to escape are buried up to their necks in the ground. This so-called preventive procedure is referred to as the tight pit. In a similar brigade, but the 9th by number, they took an even simpler approach: metal barrels. Deserters are simply locked inside for several days without water or food. Many do not come out of there alive. And to avoid having to report the deaths, such people are declared missing in action. No accountability, just another number on the list of those who have vanished. A modern army? No, this is an army of fear, cruelty, and degradation. Instead of motivation, terror; instead of brotherhood, repression. The GUR has shown detailed footage of the S-200 SAM system in use for the first time. They have officially resurrected this Soviet monster, and now it's back in action. The main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine has, for the first time, officially confirmed the combat use of the modernized 5V-28 surface-to-air missile from the S-200 system, a Soviet air defense giant long thought to be retired. This announcement is not just retro nostalgia, but a signal of the real combat return of a system capable of striking targets at enormous distances. According to Defense Express, it has been 2 years since its first use. In the summer of 2023, an unidentified missile struck Taganrog, and a year later, in April 2024, a long-range Tu-22M3 bomber was shot down from a distance of 308 kilometers. A new range record was set. Interesting details are shown in the published footage. Contrary to rumors, the launch is carried out not from a mobile platform, but from the standard stationary 5P-72V launcher, the same one that was used back in Soviet times. This dispels earlier assumptions about a complete overhaul of the system and demonstrates a skillful adaptation of old solutions to modern challenges. The S-200 is returning not as a museum exhibit, but as a real weapon in the fight for the skies. If earlier Russian aviation could feel relatively safe along the horizon, now that confidence has been shattered, and at the front, it's a new day and a new escalation. The Russians continue their assaults along the entire front line, despite losses and setbacks. In total, 166 combat clashes have been recorded, more than 5,500 shellings, over 3,000 kamikaze drone launches, and 78 airstrikes, under the cover of which the occupiers launched their attacks. However, the armed forces of Ukraine are not just holding their ground, they are destroying the enemy all along the front. In the Kramatorsk direction, the armed forces of Ukraine are under constant pressure. Here, the enemy attacks in waves. Several mechanized assaults are followed by small assault groups. The pilots of Kolodny Yar destroy armored vehicles and infantry before they even reach the positions. Strike drones identify and engage targets deep behind enemy lines. The enemy is losing not only personnel but also the rhythm of battle. The Pokrovsky direction has become a symbol of the new Russian tactics. Mass motorized assaults have replaced heavy equipment. The enemy is adapting, sending mobile groups on motorcycles and at the same time infantry across dozens of sectors, often without success. But with sheer numbers and chaos, they try to break through and sometimes succeed. In just one day, the armed forces of Ukraine repelled 60 attacks in this direction. Particularly fierce fighting is taking place near Pokrovske, Mirano-Horodok, and Udakne. Meanwhile, Special Operations Forces delivered a painful blow to enemy equipment in one of the sectors. The latest Buk M3 air defense system and a Uragan-1 multiple rocket launcher were destroyed. The cost of just one of the destroyed targets is $45 million, and that's not even counting the ammunition. The enemy has also made advances in Toretsk. That's all for today, and you can catch other news tomorrow.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Author.
Read even more high-profile events on the Times of Ukraine Telegram channel. Only the latest news and verified information. The link is in the description below the video. The Kremlin was so hysterically afraid of a Ukrainian strike on Red Square on May 9th that they pulled all available air defense systems into the Russian capital. As a result, all Russian military facilities were left unprotected. It was a hellish night for Russia. Ukrainian drones delivered powerful strikes across various regions of Russia. Strikes were coming from all directions. All the most important details are coming up.
Drone. Where is it?
Russia is on fire. Several key defense enterprises and airfields have been hit. Powerful explosions were heard in Tula. Two of the largest defense industry enterprises came under attack. Both plants are part of the state corporation Rostek. And in Saransk, Russia, 3 factories were once again targeted by UAV attacks, as well as the previously attacked optical fiber systems plant. A fire broke out there. It is here that the occupiers produce special cables for controlling UAVs. Drones also struck 2 airfields, Shaikovka and Kubinka. They are located in the Kaluga and Moscow regions.
Once again, Russian air defense has demonstrated its complete ineffectiveness. The point is that almost all air defense systems are currently concentrated on protecting the victory parade in Moscow. In other words, the main strategic knock object for the Russian military and political leadership is Moscow and the Moscow region.
But as we can see, things are not calm even in the Moscow region.
It's simple. Putin has never cared about other regions. The main thing for him is to protect himself, especially on the eve of May 9th. All the air defense systems, wherever they might have been pulled into Moscow. All week in Russia, hysteria has been growing over the possibility that Ukraine might strike Red Square and embarrass the Kremlin in front of the allies coming for the parade. And Putin is so hysterical about this that he's once again shaking his little hazel stick. Kremlin propagandists are claiming that the bunker dweller has ordered a strike with the hazel stick on Kyiv as a response to potential attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on Moscow.
This is a preemptive move aimed at memo by firstly, creating an information environment regarding the possible use of these means of destruction. And by the way, the appearance of this information points to possible scenarios by the Russian special services involving the staging of a provocation on Russian territory, which would then provide grounds for using these means of destruction.
And while Putin is preparing provocations, the defense forces have launched a new offensive in the Kursk region, according to complaints from Russians. According to them, Ukrainian units have concentrated personnel opposite the settlement of Tetkino and have blown up a bridge near the border.
In addition, Ukraine's defense forces are carrying out preemptive strikes on the rear logistics infrastructure of the Russian army, specifically targeting bridges over the Seam River. At the moment, according to reports from the Russian side, 2 bridges have been destroyed, which nullifies the Russian army's ability to redeploy personnel, resupply ammunition, and evacuate the wounded.
Meanwhile, Russian occupation forces are violating all the rules of war. During assault operations, the occupiers surrounded Ukrainian soldiers, forced them to lay down their arms and surrender. After that, they were shot with automatic weapons.
This is yet another example of the Russian Federation violating the very agreements on prisoners of war that it has ratified. In other words, these are the fundamental provisions of the Geneva Convention, which the Russian Federation has once again publicly, in effect, torn apart. Moreover, it should be noted that once again, this was a demonstrative execution of Ukrainian prisoners of war.
Meanwhile, a new war has begun in the world. India attacked Pakistani territory with missiles. Strikes were carried out on 3 locations.
In my opinion, the escalation of this armed conflict between 2 nuclear powers, according to the thinking of the Russian special services, is meant to distract attention from the Ukrainian issue and accordingly shift the focus of the international community to the Indo-Pakistani war. And this accordingly means the disruption of all peace processes regarding the Ukrainian issue and, in fact, a pause in the provision of military technical assistance to our country from both the United States and our European partners. Therefore, I do not rule out that the escalation on the Indo-Pakistani border is a multi-pronged operation by the Russian special services.
As we can see, the situation in the world is heating up. But everyone understands perfectly well, the main evil in the world is located in the Kremlin.
The terrible has been revealed. Poland is under attack. The Polish Prime Minister was shocked. Kremlin special services attacked the center of Warsaw. Meanwhile, global media exploded the information space. Putin has launched a secret unit. Arson, sabotage, espionage. The enemy is already inside Europe. Who is the Kremlin targeting? The whole truth is coming up next.
Poland has closed the Russian Federation's Consulate General, in Krakow. The reason is the arson of the Marowilska 44 shopping center in Warsaw in May 2024. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk wrote about this on his X account. He directly accused Putin's special services of the terrorist attack.
Now we know for sure that the cause of the major fire at the Marowilska shopping center in Warsaw was arson, ordered by Russian special services. Some of those responsible have already been detained. The rest have been identified and are being sought. We will find every one of you.
The investigation into the fire at the shopping center, which housed 400 stores, was under special supervision. The conclusion, the sabotage was carried out and overseen by a person from Russian territory. Now Russian diplomats have been declared persona non grata and must leave the country in the near future.
Russia needs to defeat its enemies since it hasn't been particularly successful in beating them on the front lines. So the intensification of sabotage activities, certain subversive actions, serves as a compensatory measure. Everyone in Poland understands that this is at the price of independence, the price for the fact that at this moment, our strategy, our vision for the future of Europe is prevailing.
It is possible that the Department of Special Tasks was involved in this terrorist attack. This is a new secret Kremlin unit for hybrid warfare against the West. According to analysts, the DST was created in 2023 after Russia intensified its actions against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. The creation of the department was a response to failures on the front lines and increased pressure from NATO countries.
Russia has created a new secret spy unit tasked with carrying out sabotage, cyber attacks, and assassinations across Europe. The DST operates out of the infamous GRU headquarters in Moscow, nicknamed the Aquarium. The DST can be seen as something similar to the KGB in the Soviet Union. However, the DST uses modern methods such as cyber operations and operates within the larger structure of Russian military intelligence. It seeks to unite various elements of Russian intelligence services, often coordinating its actions and working together with other Russian special units. The Sun publication.
The British publication, The Sun, released an article about the new unit within the Russian services. The Department of Special Tasks is mentioned in high-profile cases, including a plot to assassinate the head of Germany's main defense corporation, and an attempt to blow up DHL cargo planes. In the article, Dr. Lance Hunter, a professor of international relations and intelligence expert at Augusta University, states Putin is convinced that Russia is in conflict with the so-called collective West, and therefore, the creation of the Department of Special Tasks was necessary.
The DST consists of highly trained operatives and undercover agents who are selected based on their ability to maneuver covertly in other countries. The units often target countries that support Ukraine or oppose Russia, including military installations of political dissidents and infrastructure. They use methods that are difficult to trace, employing numerous forms of offensive cyber operations to weaken their targets. The Sunday edition.
Operatives are trained at the Senej Center, a special forces training complex. From there, agents are immediately sent to work in NATO countries. Special attention is given to those states that are helping Ukraine. Poland is actually the closest of all.
Victory over Russia, Russia's withdrawal from European politics, first in Ukraine and then in other countries of the former Soviet Union, does not come for free. It's clear that these are historic events that will come at a price. Part of that price is Russian subversive and sabotage activity in Poland.
The number of acts of sabotage by the new Department of Special Tasks will only increase, so Western countries should intensify pressure on the Russian Federation and increase coordination in countering the DST.
Shocked, Iran has done something terrible. Tehran is sending Russia launchers for deadly ballistic missiles. These missiles could radically change the situation on the front lines. Ukraine is alarmed, the world is on edge. What should we prepare for? How serious is this new threat, and what goals is the Kremlin pursuing now? All the details are in the plot.
As they say, it hasn't even been a year. Back in September 2024, the US stated that Iran was supplying its own missiles to Russia, sending shipments to Russia on 9 ships flying the Russian flag, which are not under sanctions. But if back then it was only about the missiles themselves, which experts counted to be around 200 units, now, according to journalists, Tehran is sending its own launchers to Moscow as well.
Iran is preparing to transfer launchers for its Fateh 360 short-range ballistic missiles to Russia in the near future.
And although the exact number of launchers being transferred is unknown, it could be dozens or just a few experimental units. Western intelligence agencies are convinced that such signals point to a dangerously close relationship developing between Russia and Iran.
If the delivery of Fateh 360 launchers does take place, it will help support Russia's devastating offensive against its neighbor and confirm the deepening of security ties between Moscow and Tehran.
As for Ukraine, Iran's transfer of such launchers would mean much more intense shelling of frontline cities, especially for Ukraine.
These systems will be used primarily and predominantly to shell frontline cities, and indeed to eliminate and destroy Ukrainian armed forces personnel and military equipment. To prevent this from happening, it is necessary to make its appropriate and timely decisions very quickly.
It should be acknowledged that, according to experts, the Iranian Fateh 360s are a much more formidable weapon compared to the inaccurate, makeshift North Korean missiles.
The missile weighs about 800 kilograms, with a warhead of around 120 to 150 kilograms and a strike range of approximately 90 to 110 kilometers. So, essentially, this is an analog of Russian multiple launch rocket systems, which use the same guidance systems. That is, this is an inertial and satellite axis. Although, of course, its flight trajectory is different, in terms of its characteristics and speed, it reaches about 3 to 4 Mach. It belongs to the class of ballistic weapons.
In the West, they even compare the Iranian Fateh 360 missiles to modern Americans' Hadi, like HIMARS. This, friends, is the equivalent of the American HIMARS. There is already a lot of information circulating in foreign media about the specifications of these missiles. In essence, they are very similar to the HIMARS we received from the United States back in 2022, which were used very effectively at the front to drive the Russians out of the right bank of the Kherson region and the Kharkiv region. However, unlike the American HIMARS, it will be much easier for Ukrainian defenders to throw the Iranian FATH missiles off course or neutralize them long before they reach their target. By interfering with satellite navigation systems, it will be possible to either deflect these missiles in a certain way or jam them, thereby reducing their accuracy. The greater the range, the lower the accuracy will be. But military analysts are convinced that the enemy's capabilities should not be underestimated either. In addition to medium-range missiles with a range of 100 to 110 kilometers, Iran, if it wishes, can also provide Moscow with its far more deadly developments. Iran also has other Fateh missile modifications, specifically the Fateh 110 with a range of 300 kilometers, the Fateh 313 with up to 500 kilometers, and the Zulfikar with a range of 700 kilometers. All of these, friends, are ballistic missiles extremely dangerous for Ukraine. But they are only dangerous if Iran actually transfers its weapons to the Kremlin. Let's not forget, according to intelligence reports, the Fateh 360 missiles themselves have been lying around in Putin's warehouses since last year. Without the Iranian launchers, they are nothing more than an inaccurate, expensive pile of metal, which is still the case today, as not just domestic but also Western analysts assert such a long pause between the delivery of the missiles themselves and the discussions about transferring the launch systems indicates that Tehran is more interested in reaching an agreement with the United States than with Moscow. Russia's deployment of these missiles could complicate US President Donald Trump's efforts to organize a ceasefire and peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. The indirect negotiations between the US and Iran on the nuclear program, mediated by Oman, are one of several reasons for the delay in the delivery of the launchers. As a result, the Iranian launchers being discussed today might not be sent anywhere at all by Tehran. It is possible that they could become part of a new deal with the United States in exchange for easing sanctions pressure on the country. And the talk about possibly transferring another batch of deadly weapons to Putin is just a bargaining chip in the ongoing negotiations with the White House.
That's all for now. But for more breaking news from the front, tune into the next episode.